I was clutching my eviction notice when a man in a $10,000 suit knocked on my door. 24 hours later, I owned the entire building. But here's what nobody knows. This billionaire wasn't a stranger. And the reason he helped me, it would expose the darkest secret my landlord ever kept. Before this story unfolds, do me a favor. Hit that like button if you believe in karma, and subscribe, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. My name is Sienna Brooks, and I never thought my life would become the kind of story people tell to restore their faith in humanity. But on a cold Tuesday in March, sitting on my worn-out couch with an eviction notice in one hand and my 7-year-old son Dylan's asthma inhaler in the other, I didn't believe in much of anything anymore. I'd been living in apartment 4B of Riverside Towers for 6 years. When I first moved in, it was a beautiful building with functional heating, responsive management, and neighbors who became family. I was a young single mother back then, just 26, working as a nurse at County General during the day and picking up waitress shifts at Romano's Diner 3 nights a week. It wasn't easy, but Dylan and I were making it work. We were happy. Then Victor Castellano bought the building 8 months ago, and everything changed. Victor wasn't just a landlord. He was a predator in expensive Italian loafers. His management company had a reputation for buying older buildings in working-class neighborhoods, driving out long-term tenants, and either flipping the properties or converting them into luxury rentals. He raised our rent by 40% within the first 3 months. Repair requests went ignored. The heat barely worked. The elevator was broken more often than it functioned. I watched Victor systematically dismantle the community I loved. Mr. Patterson, the elderly veteran in 2A who'd lived here for 15 years, was evicted over a $200 shortfall. The Ramirez family in 3C got a 30-day notice because their daughter's medical equipment allegedly violated building codes. Codes that Victor himself ignored when it came to maintaining the property. But I'd always managed to pay my rent on time. Always. Until Dylan's asthma attack landed him in the emergency room for 3 days. The hospital bills were crushing, and I had to miss work. For the first time in my life, I was $1,200 short on rent. Victor delivered my eviction notice himself. He knocked on my door at 9 in the morning. Dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. His smile was cold, calculated. Dylan was eating breakfast at our little kitchen table, still recovering, his breathing still slightly labored. "Ms. Brooks," Victor said, holding out the notice with manicured fingers. "You have 72 hours. Should have thought about your kid before you decided not to pay." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Dylan looked up from his cereal, his innocent brown eyes moving between Victor's face and mine. "Mommy, what's that paper?" "Nothing, baby," I whispered, but my hands were shaking as I took the notice. "Finish your breakfast." Victor turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Ms. Brooks? Don't bother begging for an extension. I don't do charity cases." He actually winked at me before he left. That night, after Dylan fell asleep, I sat in our bathroom with the door closed and cried harder than I had since his father walked out on us. I called every shelter in the city, all full. I looked at my bank account, $633 to my name. I scrolled through apartment listings, knowing I couldn't afford the deposits, couldn't pass the credit checks, couldn't start over. I packed some of Dylan's toys into boxes, trying to prepare for the inevitable. His favorite stuffed elephant, his collection of dinosaur figures, the blanket my mother had made before she died. Each item felt like a piece of our life being dismantled, packed away, erased. On the second day of my eviction countdown, I was hollow. I'd called in sick to both jobs because I couldn't stop crying. Couldn't face people, couldn't pretend everything was okay. Dylan was at school, and I was staring at our walls, wondering how I'd explain homelessness to a 7-year-old boy who already had anxiety about his health. Then someone knocked on my door at 8 in the evening. I almost didn't answer. I thought it might be Victor coming to gloat, or maybe building security, coming to ensure I was leaving. But something made me check the peephole. The man standing in my hallway didn't look like he belonged in Riverside Towers. He was in his late 50s, distinguished, wearing a suit that made Victor's wardrobe look like a discount rack purchase. But it was his eyes that caught me. Kind eyes, sad eyes, eyes that had seen pain and understood it. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you? Miss Brooks?" Sienna Brooks. His voice was gentle, educated. "My name is Julian Westbrook. I need 5 minutes of your time. It's about this building." My first thought was that he worked for Victor, maybe a lawyer coming to expedite my removal. "I'm leaving in 24 hours. Whatever papers you need me to sign." "I'm not with Castellano," he interrupted quickly. "In fact, I'm here to make sure you never have to leave this building." "May I come in?" Something in his tone made me trust him. Or maybe I was just desperate enough to listen to anyone offering hope. I unlocked the chain and let him in. Julian Westbrook sat on my worn couch and looked around the apartment with genuine interest, not judgment. He noticed Dylan's drawings on the refrigerator, the medical bills stacked on the counter, the half-packed boxes in the corner. "Ms. Brooks, I'm going to be direct because we don't have much time," he said, turning to face me. "I'm a property investor, and I want to buy this building from Victor Castellano, but I don't want to buy it for myself. I want to buy it and put it in your name." I actually laughed. It was such an absurd statement that my exhausted, desperate brain couldn't process it as anything but a joke or a scam. "I'm sorry, what?" "The building is worth approximately $4.5 million. Castellano will sell. He always does when the offer is right. I want to purchase it tomorrow at closing. And I want the deed transferred directly to you, Sienna Brooks. You'll own Riverside Towers outright." I stood up, suddenly angry. "Who are you? Is this some kind of sick joke? Did Victor send you to mock me?" "Send you to mock me?" Julian remained calm. Reaching into his jacket pocket, he pulled out a business card and what looked like a bank statement. "I'm quite serious. This is my attorney's contact information. These are my proof of funds. I have my reasons for wanting to help you, but right now, I need you to trust me. Can you be at my attorney's office tomorrow at 10 in the morning?" "Why?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." For the first time, his composed expression cracked. Pain flickered across his face, deep and old, and complicated. "Let's just say I have my reasons. And I've been watching how Castellano operates. You deserve better. This building deserves better. Will you come?" I should have said no. Every logical part of my brain screamed that this a con, a setup, something too good to be true. But I looked at Julian Westbrook's eyes and saw something I recognized, the look of someone carrying a debt they needed to repay, a weight they needed to lift. "I'll be there," I whispered. He stood, headed for the door, then paused. "Sienna, your mother's name was Diane, wasn't it?" "Diane Brooks?" My blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" "Tomorrow," he said softly. "All your questions will be answered tomorrow." After he left, I couldn't sleep. I researched Julian Westbrook until 3 in the morning. Self-made billionaire, tech industry pioneer, known for quiet philanthropy. There were photos of him at charity events, articles about his business innovations, mentions of personal tragedy, a daughter who nearly died in a drowning accident 30 years ago. And then I found it, an old photo from a fundraiser in 1995. Julian, standing next to a teenage girl, both of them smiling. The caption read, "Julian Westbrook and daughter Lily celebrate her recovery after near-fatal pool accident." Something about the photo made my chest tighten, but I couldn't figure out why. I looked at Dylan, sleeping peacefully in his bed, and I prayed that whatever was happening, it was real. The next morning, I dressed in my only good outfit and took Dylan to my neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Chen had been watching him for years, one of the few tenants Victor hadn't managed to drive out yet. At Julian's attorney's office, I felt completely out of place among the marble floors and expensive artwork. Then Victor walked in, and my stomach dropped. He saw me, and his expression shifted from confusion to anger to something like amusement. "What is this, Westbrook? Did you bring her here to beg? Because I'm not interested in Mr. Castellano," the attorney interrupted. "A sharp woman named Patricia Frost. Please sit. We're here to execute the sale of Riverside Towers. You've agreed to the terms. You've signed the preliminary paperwork. We just need to finalize." Victor sat, but he kept glancing at me suspiciously. Julian arrived a few minutes later and sat beside me without a word. The transaction was surreal. Papers passing back and forth. Legal language I barely understood. Victor's signature going on document after document. Then Patricia read the final transfer of deed, and the property located at 1847 Riverside Drive, including all 12 residential units, common areas, and associated land, shall be transferred to the sole ownership of Sienna Marie Brooks. The color drained from Victor's face. "What number? That's not, this is fraud." "All legal, Mr. Castellano," Julian said calmly. "You signed the papers. You got your money. The building now belongs to Miss Brooks." Victor stood so fast, his chair fell backward. "Who are you? What's your connection to Westbrook? This is some kind of scheme." I honestly couldn't answer. I was as shocked as he was. I looked at Julian, pleading silently for answers. But he kept his eyes on Victor. "The transaction is complete," Patricia said firmly. "Mr. Castellano, your company has been paid in full. This meeting is over." Victor pointed a shaking finger at me. "I'll find out what game you're playing. I'll sue both of you. I'll destroy you." Julian stood slowly, and something in his demeanor changed. The kind, sad man from my apartment was gone. In his place was someone harder, colder, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with physical threat. "Mr. Castellano, I strongly suggest you walk away while you still can. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Something in Julian's voice made Victor hesitate. For a moment, the predator looked like prey. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, but not before shooting me a look of pure hatred. I sat in that attorney's office, holding the deed to a $4.5 million building, and I couldn't process any of it. Julian thanked Patricia, arranged for her to set up a property management trust in my name, and then asked if he could speak with me privately. We went to a quiet cafe 2 blocks away. Dylan would be fine with Mrs. Chen for another hour, and I desperately needed answers. "Why?" I asked, as soon as we sat down. "Please, Julian, just tell me why you did this." He was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee, gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Sienna, 30 years ago, my daughter Lily was at a public pool. She was 13 years old, and she was drowning. The lifeguard on duty, a young woman, barely 22, dove in without hesitation. She saved Lily's life, got her to the surface, got her breathing again. But there was an underwater current caused by a broken drain. The lifeguard got caught in it. My heart started pounding. Something in his story felt familiar, like a memory I'd been told but never experienced. That lifeguard's name was Diane Brooks, your mother." The cafe seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table. "No, my mother drowned when I was 3. It was an accident, just an accident." "It was ruled an accident," Julian said, and now there were tears in his eyes. "But it wasn't. The pool had safety violations. The owners knew about the broken drain and did nothing. After Diane died, they covered it up, paid off inspectors, settled quietly with your grandmother. I was devastated, grateful for my daughter's life, but destroyed by the cost. I tried to find your family to thank them, to help you, but your grandmother moved away and changed her phone number. I think she couldn't bear the reminders." I was crying now too. I'd grown up with only fragments of my mother's story. My grandmother had died when I was 16, and she'd rarely talked about how my mother passed. I knew she'd been a lifeguard. I knew she'd drowned saving someone, but I never knew the details, never knew there was more to the story. I've been looking for you for years, Julian continued. I hired investigators, searched records, followed every lead. I found you 2 months ago. You were living in Riverside Towers, working yourself to exhaustion, raising Dylan alone. I wanted to help, but I needed to understand your situation first. Then I learned who your landlord was. He pulled out his phone and showed me documents, articles, legal records. Victor Castellano. When I researched him, I discovered something that changed everything. His father owned that pool where your mother died. Victor was there that day, a 17-year-old kid who saw everything. His father, Vincent Castellano, was the one who covered up the safety violations. He paid off officials, buried reports, made sure his family's liability was minimized. Your mother's death was deemed accidental. Your grandmother got a small settlement, and the Castellanos went on with their lives. The room was spinning. Victor was there. He saw my mother die. He was the one who found Lily and your mother in the water. He called for help, but did nothing else. And Sienna, here's what makes this even worse. Vincent Castellano taught his son the same business practices. Victor's company has been systematically targeting vulnerable people for decades, displacing families, covering up building violations, profiting from negligence, just like his father did. When I realized you were his tenant, that he was trying to evict you, I knew this was my chance to finally do right by your mother and stop Victor from hurting anyone else. I couldn't breathe. 30 years of karma, 30 years of connection, all converging in my tiny apartment with an eviction notice and a man in an expensive suit. But there's one more thing you need to know, Julian said, and his expression shifted to something like anger. Something I discovered just last week while preparing for this. It's why I moved so quickly, why I needed to act now. He pulled out another document, and my hands shook as I took it. It was an internal memo from Victor's company, dated just 6 months ago. As I read it, my blood turned to ice. The memo outlined a deliberate strategy: research the backgrounds of tenants, identify those with past tragedies or family histories that could be exploited, and use that information to push them out faster. And there, highlighted in yellow, was my name with a note beside it. Mother died in pool incident 1995. Castellano family history. Potential leverage if resistance to eviction. Victor knew. He knew exactly who I was. He knew my mother had died saving someone at his family's pool, and he was using that history as some kind of sick strategy to evict me faster. He targeted you specifically, Julian said, his voice hard. Not just as another tenant to displace, but because of who your mother was, because her death was part of his family's hidden past, and he wanted to erase any remaining connection to it. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Victor hadn't just been a predatory landlord. He'd been deliberately trying to drive me out, because my very existence was a reminder of his family's sins. I don't remember much of the rest of that day. Julian arranged everything: property management, legal protection, financial structures. He set up a trust that would generate income for me while ensuring the building was properly maintained. He hired attorneys to investigate Victor's company, and within weeks, criminal charges were filed for housing violations across multiple properties. But what I do remember clearly is going home to apartment 4B that evening, Dylan running into my arms, Mrs. Chen asking if everything was okay. I remember looking around at the walls that almost stopped being our home, and I remember the weight of the deed in my purse. "Mommy, are we still leaving?" Dylan asked, his small face worried. "No, baby," I said, holding him close. "We're never leaving. This is our home. This is our building now." 1 week later, I made my first decision as the owner of Riverside Towers. I reduced rent for every tenant by 30%. I hired a contractor to fix the elevator, repair the heating system, and address every single complaint that Victor had ignored. Mr. Patterson moved back into 2A, rent-free for the first year, as an apology for what he'd endured. The Ramirez family returned to 3C. Victor's company collapsed under the weight of investigations and lawsuits. Former tenants from his other properties came forward with their stories. Evidence of his systematic targeting of vulnerable people made headlines. He lost his business, his reputation, and eventually he faced criminal charges for housing fraud and negligence. The last time I saw Victor was in a courthouse hallway 2 months later. He was heading into a hearing, his expensive suit replaced with something off a department store rack. His arrogance replaced with the hollow look of someone who'd lost everything. He saw me and stopped. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew who I was, who my mother was. You targeted me because of it." Victor's jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he might deny it. Then his shoulders sagged. "My father made me promise to never talk about that day, to never acknowledge what happened. When I found out you were living in my building, I thought if I got rid of you, I could finally bury that past completely." "My mother saved a child's life," I said, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. "She was a hero, and you tried to punish me for her heroism, to erase the reminder of your family's negligence. That's who you are, that's your legacy." He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the courtroom, where he'd face consequences 3 decades in the making. Today, 1 year later, I'm still living in apartment 4B. But now I'm not just a tenant. I'm the owner of a building that's become a real community again. Dylan is thriving, his asthma under control, his world stable and secure. I've gone back to nursing full-time, passionate about my work in ways I hadn't been in years. Julian visits once a month. He's become family, a surrogate grandfather to Dylan, someone who carries the gratitude for my mother's sacrifice and channels it into making our lives better. His daughter Lily reached out recently, asking to meet me. She's a mother herself now, with 2 kids who exist because my mother dove into that pool 30 years ago. Last weekend, I took Dylan to visit my mother's grave. It was time he knew the full story of the grandmother he never met. "Your grandmother was a hero, buddy," I said, kneeling beside him at the headstone. "She saved a little girl's life. She didn't think about the danger, didn't hesitate. She just acted because it was the right thing to do. And that little girl grew up, had a family, and her father never forgot what Grandma Diane did." Dylan looked up at me with those wise brown eyes. "And he helped us." "He helped us," I confirmed, "because good things come back around. Maybe not right away, maybe not in the way we expect, but they come back around." Standing there in the cemetery, holding my son's hand, I thought about karma, justice, and the strange ways the universe balances its scales. My mother saved a life and lost her own. 30 years later, the man whose daughter she saved gave me back my home and exposed the family who'd tried to bury the truth of her death. Victor tried to evict me, tried to erase me, tried to destroy the last connection to his family's darkest secret. Instead, he lost everything while I gained the security and stability I desperately needed. I looked at the building keys in my pocket, at Dylan's hand in mine, at my mother's name carved in stone. "Mom," I whispered, "you saved a life, and 30 years later, that life saved ours. You're still protecting us. You're still our hero." Karma isn't just real. It's patient. It waits for the perfect moment to strike, for all the pieces to fall into place, for justice to manifest in ways we never could have imagined. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to believe in justice. Subscribe because I've got more true stories that prove what goes around comes around. And drop a comment. Do you believe everything happens for a reason? Because after living this, I absolutely do.